well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I am glad to have you with us on the program today. Coming up in just a moment, we're going to be talking with Mr. Benjamin Maness, who has a new piece at Philadelphia Weekly that I think is worth getting into. You know, Philadelphia is having some real issues with violent crime. They nearly set a record for homicides last year. They are on pace to at least get close to that number again. They may very well set a record for homicides in 2021. And you've got a number of issues here. I mean, you've got an anti-gun mayor in Jim Kenney. You've got a district attorney in Larry Krasner who is soft on crime. I have no issues, by the way, with Larry Krasner saying, look, we're not going to make simply carrying a firearm without a license a priority for our prosecutors. I actually don't have a problem with that. I do, however, have a problem with the decline in the number of felony cases prosecuted by Larry Krasner's office, including violent felonies. The number of individuals who are being released on bond for violent crimes, despite being a threat to the community, despite perhaps having a lengthy previous criminal history. You've got a gun-centric attitude in Philadelphia. If we could just do something about the guns, then the crime will disappear. Well, Benjamin Maness, in his new piece at Philadelphia Weekly, says, look, let's call a murder a murder. He writes, Philadelphia had more murders in the first half of 2021 than the entire year from 2013 to 2017. Denoting the grim reality that neither elected nor appointed leaders have a plan to stop the rise of violent crime in the city. Meanwhile, the media have universally labeled the seemingly uncontrolled crime uptick as a, quote, gun violence epidemic. And he says by using the term gun violence instead of the legal definitions of murder, attempted murder, and assault, the accountability for the criminal who committed these violent crimes is semantically shifted to the mere tool that they illegally used to victimize others. We're going to talk about this with Benjamin Maness. In fact, let's get the conversation started right now. Take a look and a listen. Hey, Ben, thanks so much for coming on the program. It's good talking with you today.
It's my pleasure.
So I got to ask, first of all, what prompted you to write about this for Philadelphia Weekly?
So I've actually been covering topics like this for years. I've covered them in The Hill. I've covered them in the Daily Caller, Newsmax, Arizona Republic, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Buffalo News. Even in the Philadelphia Inquirer in a piece, basically, the issues from the perspective of myself as, I'm not a journalist per se. I became a journalist because I was being trolled by journalists and I had a tit for tat, but I come from the public safety community. I'm a former cop. I'm a former cop from DC where the gun law got overturned, because it was unconstitutional, and I'm from New York, where that all started, where gun control in the Sullivan Act started as a thing, and it needs to be mentioned that it's never worked. It is a political tool.
Absolutely.
We need to call. I believe in educating people. I believe in educating leaders. I don't believe there should be two sets of news. I believe there is only one set of news, and that is the truth. And the problem with this whole argument is it's a political crutch. So if you're a mayor like Jim Kenney, like Bill de Blasio, like Muriel Bowser, you have a responsibility. You have a duty to address why people are picking up guns illegally and using them to victimize other people. But that is a very complex issue.
Right. And gun violence, quote unquote, and say we're going to deal with gun violence. That is a very simplistic approach. I want to quote from your piece. You talked with a senior Philadelphia police commander who's spoken to the condition of anonymity because he's afraid of reprisals from the department. He said, quote, it's a fact that less than 1% of the time legitimate gun owners discharge their firearms. And usually when that occurs, it's done legally in defense of themselves, in defense of family members, in defense of an innocent victim, or in defense of their property. We do not have people with gun permits and registered firearms going around the streets of the city randomly shooting people. Recidivist criminals, the overwhelming majority who were let out by Larry Krasner, the DA, are committing the shootings. I think this is a key factor that nobody really wants to talk about, certainly not within the Philadelphia government here. Nope. When they talk about, we need to do something about getting rid of the guns. And you write about this as well. Look, we live in a nation with 100 million legal gun owners, with 400 million legally owned firearms, and the constitutional right to keep and bear them. So when I hear we need to do something about the guns, what I hear is we need to crack down on people's civil rights. And I look at what's going on in Philadelphia, where, again, you've got repeat violent offenders who are driving this violence. And it seems like the city's approach, Ben, is almost an abstinence policy when it comes to firearms. They don't want people to own them. They certainly don't want people to carry them. And they don't want people to be trained and educated on how to use a firearm. I mean, if somebody tried to open up a range in Northeast Philadelphia, what kind of barriers do you think the city would put in place?
Yeah, actually not that. I mean, so you have anti-gun groups that are protesting the permitting in such places. But, it should be pointed out that Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in general, actually, is a island of sanity in the Northeast. So we don't have draconian gun laws in Pennsylvania. As much as our city leaders would prefer that we did, and they've actually tried to get the state to enable municipal gun laws in Philadelphia, the way that there are separate laws in the 5 boroughs of New York, as opposed to the rest of the state of New York. And Harrisburg, our state legislature shot that down, outright. And the reason is statistically, there is no proof that draconian gun laws work. And this is one of the few places like Washington, D.C., for example, where you could prove they don't work. The truth is, if you look at Camden, New Jersey, Trenton, New Jersey, Atlantic City, New Jersey, and New York have some of the most stringent gun laws in America. They're very, very anti-Second Amendment. But we're separated by a bridge. We're right over the river. Our laws, we're a shall issue state. They're a may issue state. So why is their crime equal, if not worse, per capita in their big cities than in Philadelphia? The truth is, it's not the tool used to commit the crime. It's absolutely actual enforcement of the existing laws. So I'm not over here, running around saying we should have no gun laws, or we should become a constitutional carry state, because this is a big city. This is a very dense urban environment. So there needs to be some kind of permitting, training, and documentation. The problem is when the government tries to make it about legal gun owners, and what that police commander has said, unequivocally is the people with permits are not the problem. The people who jump through the hoops to get their permit, to submit to a background check. I don't care where you are in America. That's not the problem. So.
The only thing that I would say, I don't want to derail the conversation by getting into a constitutional carry debate, but we have seen the city of Philadelphia sued because they actually shut down their gun permit unit for a period of months beginning last year in the wake of the COVID shutdowns. And so you did have a situation where people who were legally eligible to carry a firearm could not do so because the city wasn't processing their permits. And ultimately we had, I don't know what the backlog is at the moment, but for a while there, the backlog was more than a year. Folks were having to wait more than a year to exercise their right, which I would argue leads to some people carrying illegally. Because if you live in a bad neighborhood and you want to protect yourself, at some point you're gonna take that risk. I would rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
100%. Yeah, I mean look, I'm a victim of that. In 2005, I was working with the Department of Homeland Security as a cleared regulatory inspector on critical infrastructure, and I had Virginia permits, and I went into the district with my firearm. A former DC cop, a former 2-time police shooter on their Olympic team, and they charged me with, crossing the bridge on the old DC gun law, which has since been overturned. So, I mean, you could make that argument, but the truth is there's a lot less crime right over the Potomac in Virginia than there is in the district. And that has very little to do with the, unconstitutionally stringent gun laws that the district has. So, I mean, the question with, using COVID, I wrote a piece in bigtrial.net about how the city of Philadelphia used COVID as an excuse to push gun permit appointment, the initial, basically the go leave your fingerprints, appointment. And they pushed that back almost 2 years because using COVID as an excuse, and they have tried to roll that back. But the truth is that's more an oversight issue in Pennsylvania than it is, a gun rights issue, because what it is in Philadelphia is this is the only city where the police department issues gun permits in Pennsylvania. Every other county, it's the sheriff. The sheriff is elected. They're into constituent service. So if you look right over the border in Bucks County, they actually added an office at a strip mall in Levittown, and night hours so that you could go get your permit, versus the Philly Police Department, which is an executive branch agency, and they don't get paid or extra or keep their job, regardless of how poorly they do their job in that aspect.
Yeah, and I'm old enough to remember former Mayor John Street specifically blaming the rise in homicides on concealed carry holders. And he said he actually wanted to stop issuing concealed carry licenses. And the media, frankly, back then they actually called them out. They said, well, how many murders were committed by concealed carry holders? Well, I don't have that information. Well, the number was 0. So we've seen this anti-gun attitude, but how does this distract, you think, from actually addressing violent crime in Philadelphia? If they're blaming it on gun violence, we got to get the guns off the streets, we got to have gun buybacks, guns. Are they just losing sight? Are they uninterested in actually dealing with the individuals who are pulling the trigger, who are carrying guns illegally, who are maybe arrested on violent crimes and are quickly bonded out and put back onto the streets? Are they just not? Is that not part of the equation?
It's the oldest crutch in the political playbook as a local mayor, what have you, district attorney. Because if you blame the tool, you're not looking at the sociological impact of the person using the tool. And that's the real problem, is because we have a DA, one of many in the country, who was elected under a very radical regime. He was elected with outside money, and his entire playbook has been decarceration. So he's basically eliminated most bail and lessened most charging for criminals in the city of Philadelphia. And that runs the gamut from shoplifting to armed robbery. And there are a couple of captains. The district captain in the 18th district, for example, has a Twitter where he has taken to Twitter to show guns that are seized and perpetrators that are arrested, because he knows there's a very large chance that they're going to be let go, that somewhere along the lines they're going to be released pre-confinement, and not going to, escalate that cycle of criminality. So the issue here is, yes, they're relabeling things. Whenever you hear catchphrases like gun violence, what is gun violence? It's a crime. It's attempted murder. It's murder. It's armed robbery. It's armed rape. Why aren't we using the actual legal terms for what these gun violence things are? And the truth is, because when you use the legal term murder, you have to look at a murderer who committed the crime. And the more you think about who committed the crime and assign blame where blame belongs, you have to wonder why these people aren't being held accountable. And I'm talking about the criminal at hand, as well as the DA who is not enforcing the law the way it is written in the city. And when he doesn't do that, people of color, people who are poor, are the ones being victimized. So all the people he swore to make, equality and equity. Equity is the new catchphrase, because it isn't equality. Equality is the opportunity for outcome, not outcome. And people like Larry Krasner are the ones causing people to die at wholesale rates, unheard of record rates in the city of Philadelphia.
And yet Krasner just cruised to re-election, Ben. I mean, that's the thing, is this doesn't seem to be harming Larry Krasner's political life.
Well, the problem in Philadelphia is it's a one-party town. He hasn't really technically been reelected yet, but he's expected to. He won the primary, unfortunately, against an extremely capable, qualified former assistant district attorney named Carlos Vega. But, it became about voter turnout. There was only an 11% voter turnout in the primary this year. And he's going against a Republican who hasn't really been out there, and he's outnumbered 7-1 anyhow in the polls. So, the issue is money, right? Well, let's talk about campaign finance. When you're outnumbered 7-1 in a city that has a $3,000 campaign finance limit, how do you overcome such a barrier? You either need to import 1 million new voters, or you need to have a name. And if you look in history, let's look at Rudy Giuliani, who was the first Republican mayor elected to the city of New York since Fiorello LaGuardia, who was the mayor of New York during World War II. So how does a guy beat that long and odd? And the truth is, he was a celebrity. He was the guy who put John Gotti away. He was a famous federal prosecutor. We don't have anyone famous in Philly running against guys like Larry Krasner. I wish we did.
What's Gritty's position on violent crime? Do we know?
Well, the sad part is Gritty. A lot of the hipsters use Gritty as a mascot in this town on everything, stickers, voting things. So I'm pretty sure Gritty is not on the same page as us, nor is the fanatic. But what are you going to do?
Yeah. So I mean, do you have any optimism about things changing in Philadelphia? Because you write about, and you quote Mike Bresnan, who's the head of Local 22, the union representing the firefighters and paramedics in Philadelphia. And he says, quote, "This isn't about guns. It's about a total lack of accountability by our city's criminal justice leaders. Every day, our members treat and transport repeat victims of violent crime, addiction, and accidents." It seems to me like you've got this growing divide between the lawmakers and the law enforcers, the first responders, whether it's, the cop on the street, the firefighter, the paramedic, the folks who are actually witnessing the outcomes of these types of policies. And they're screaming from the rooftops, hey, something's got to change. But then the politicians, who, as you say, are in this one-party town, all they have to do is say, no, it's not the people. We don't have to deal with any individuals. It's the system. It's guns. It's all of these things. And all we need is more money and more laws, and we can take care of the problem. More power, and we can take care of the problem.
And they'll blame things that aren't necessarily even defined, like social justice, inequity, racial inequality, systemic racism. And the truth is this. I could have quoted John McNesby, who's the head of the FOP here. He's a friend. I love the guy. But John McNesby has been labeled as covering for corrupt cops. So, because he's the union head for the police officers. So putting him in there wouldn't have helped, but putting the head of the firefighters union. I mean, nobody hates firemen, right? Nobody hates paramedics. They come and they help people. But the truth is, before we even had this murder surge, we had an opioid pandemic.
Yep.
And the opioid epidemic in Philadelphia is the worst in the nation. We had over 1,200 deaths from opioids here. So, what do you say to an ambulance crew working in Kensington? They're unarmed. They have meds on the bus, and they're coming and they're scooping up people who are amid a crowd of lawless people. There were drug dealers. There were armed people around. I mean, nobody is safe on the streets. And the truth is, because we're not holding people accountable who are entering a cycle of crime. And as long as you're not doing that, interrupting that cycle of criminality, it will escalate. Every sociological and criminological study in history, and you're talking to a guy with a master's degree, you're talking to a guy whose undergrad was in criminal justice, has shown that, broken windows theory policing worked because you're interrupting a minor cycle of criminality so that you could, it doesn't escalate to murder. So what do you say about change? Change will not happen in Philadelphia at the local level. There is nobody in our city government, with the exception of maybe 2 councilmen, maybe 3, who care enough to actually change things because they're worried about keeping their phony baloney jobs, as Blazing Saddles said so well. So what do you say about change? Well, the state's getting fed up. So there might be changes coming both in the legislative and with the upcoming gubernatorial election that are going to add accountability. Whereas if the city of Philadelphia or any other city, whether it be Allentown or Pittsburgh or York, if they don't clean up their act, the state will assign people to do it. The state will come in with a special prosecutor or what have you to come in and do it. And we're working toward, there's a bill in the House right now being introduced by Martina White, who's a state rep here in Northeast Philly. and it is going to be the first ever recall amendment in the state. Because if people like Larry Krasner continue to endanger lives with their reckless policies, just like Florida and California, they need to be recalled. They need to be thrown out of office. So if the city doesn't want to do it for themselves, it's getting to the point where the commuters in the suburban counties and Harrisburg is getting really fed up with throwing good money after bad, and they're going to come in and clean up house.
All right, Ben, listen, man, I cannot thank you enough for joining me on the program today. Would love to continue the conversation at some point in the future.
Anytime, bud.
Appreciate it very much. Ben Maness, and you can read his piece at PhiladelphiaWeekly.com. Appreciate Ben joining us on the program. Now let's turn to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report as well. We'll start there with a story out of Chicago. The website CWB Chicago. Again, a great resource for folks who care not only about the city of Chicago. I mean, it's a good resource for Chicago residents, but even if you don't live in Chicago, if you care about violent crime, if you care about the ineptitude of a gun control ideology and making cities safer places, I highly encourage you to read CWB Chicago on a regular basis. Check out this headline. Man convicted of 7 robberies won't go to prison because he spent so much time on electronic monitoring. Yeah. Chicago's criminal justice system is a mess. That's not the word that I would like to use, but this is family friendly, so I will stick with that. I had a story of Bearing Arms earlier today about a guy out on bond for attempted murder who's now been charged with murder and attempted murder in another shooting, but the original attempted murder charge was from 2018, and this guy still hasn't gone to trial. It's almost 2022, and this guy is still awaiting trial on that attempted murder charge from 2018. As a result, he got released on bond because it's really difficult to argue you should keep somebody in prison for 3 years while they're awaiting trial. Even if they've got a lengthy criminal history, you consider them to be a danger to the community, you also have the right to a speedy trial. And that's not happening in Cook County. And as a result, you get stories like this. 22-year-old Bryce McGill, who pleaded guilty to committing 7 robberies during the summer of 2017, spent virtually no time in jail, and will spend no time in prison because his sentence has been offset by the time that he spent on electronic home monitoring awaiting trial. Yeah. McGill's family, back in 2017, posted $15,000 to get him out of jail on electronic monitoring after a first hearing regarding these 7 robberies. And he stayed on electronic monitoring for, nearly 5 years until he pleaded guilty to the 5 robberies and 2 aggravated robberies. And Judge Catherine Habercorn sentenced Bryce McGill to 7 concurrent 7-year prison terms. But the state also reduced his sentence by 50% for good behavior. So that's now 3.5 years for 7 robberies. And then the state said, well, he was on electronic monitoring while he was awaiting trial, so it's offset. Yeah, you're free to go now. 7 robberies and not a day in jail or a day in prison, despite 7 guilty pleas. That's what justice looks like in the city of Chicago these days. Today's Armed Citizen story from Washington State, where a Moses Lake woman shot a suspected burglar during a home invasion. This was the middle of the night on Sunday, around midnight Sunday. Police say authorities were in the area tracking down a car theft suspect when they got a 911 call about a home invasion in the area. Officers say the caller reported that somebody had broken into her home and that she had shot them in self-defense. Police say they found the suspect trying to leave the home. Medics were able to take them to the local hospital for non-life-threatening injuries. Don't have a lot of information other than that. I guess the suspect's going to be facing charges. Sounds like this was a clear-cut case of self-defense, so I'm guessing that the woman is not, but not a lot of information about that defensive gun use there in Moses Lake, Washington. We'll try to give you some more details if they do become available. And finally today, our good deed of the day, a correctional officer from Indiana in the right place at the right time and willing and able to do the right thing to save the life of a bicyclist Brian Jameson says, I think it was God that put me there to be in that position to save the life of an individual. Jameson was on a motorcycle with his wife a couple weeks ago. This was August 25th. He saw a semi pull to the side of the road. And then he saw by the way, I said a bicyclist. I think this was a motorcyclist. I saw a motorcycle in the ditch near the semi with the driver lying next to the motorcycle. So Brian Jameson immediately stopped to help, found the motorist was in distress. He was breathing, thankfully. Jameson tried to keep the rider awake while waiting for emergency workers. But before they arrived, the cyclist stopped breathing. And so Brian Jameson was forced to perform CPR on the man. When the emergency crews got there, the motorcyclist was breathing again, thanks to Jameson's actions. And it sounds like this guy is going to be okay. Last report, he is listed as stable, anyway, in a hospital in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Brian Jameson says he didn't want to make a big deal of his efforts at the time, but he does believe that he was in the right place at the right time due to more than just chance. He said, I think it was God that put me there. He said, I was supposed to leave my house 45 minutes earlier than I did, but through a weird sequence of events, I left later than I was going to. He said he didn't drive the normal route that he takes. Normally, he likes to drive down the back roads when he's on his motorcycle, but this time he decided to go down the main highway instead. He also said that he did not know CPR until he began working at the prison where he works. And he says that training helped save the man's life. He says, because of this, I cannot take all of the credit for what happened. I'm just glad he's going to be okay. The deputy warden of the Miami Correctional Facility, George Payne Jr., says that Jameson deserves recognition for his life-saving actions, saying, quote, I am proud of Correctional Officer Jameson. While I understand he does not want to be portrayed as a hero, his actions were heroic, and he deserves credit for what he did. Indeed. So, Officer Jameson, we thank you, sir, for your very good deed. And again, glad you were in the right place at the right time. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being in the right place at the right time. I mean, this is available on demand, so anytime's the right time for Bearing Arms Cam & Company, if you ask me. Anyway, do want to thank you for being a part of today's program. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. Of course, you can also check out bearingarms.com in the meantime, and that way you'll get access to even more news that you need to know about that impact your right to keep and bear arms. Until we talk, actually, I guess I should tell you, if you like what you see, you can also become a VIP member at Bearing Arms. Just go to bearingarms.com/subscribe. Use the promo code GUNS. You can get 25% off of your VIP membership. We certainly do appreciate your support. It means a lot to us. We'd like to give you something in exchange so you get exclusive analysis, commentary, news stories you won't find anywhere else as our way of saying thank you. And we will be back tomorrow with even more of the latest news you need to know about when it comes to your Second Amendment rights. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.